Fred Iausly has over 28 years of experience in the geospatial field. He has been a senior GIS analyst with the Dane County Land Information Office since 1996. His experience includes project lead for the Fly Dane aerial imagery product since 1999. He also provides data management support for the Dane County 911. He has been chair of the Land Information Officers Network, on the board of directors of the Wisconsin Land Information Association, serves on the WLIA Next Gen 911 Task Force and Next Gen 911 Special Interest Group. We also have Andy Faust. He earned a bachelor's degree in urban regional studies from the University of Wisconsin-Oshkosh in 1992. Andy has almost 30 years experience in GIS and planning and has worked with all forms of local government to help with a wide range of GIS and planning projects. Andy sits on the Governor's Broadband Task Force and 911 Subcommittee. Andy has worked on many WLIA annual conference committees and participated with the WLIA Next Gen 911 and WLIA Ortho Imagery Task Forces. And I am going to hand it over to them for them to explain to you how to get your address point and street centerline data ready to publish to the WLIA standard.
Interestingly enough, I'm having some issues getting my presentation to show up. What's going on here? Let's try it again. Are you seeing anything yet? No.
Sometimes it takes a second.
Yeah, let me share. Click on that and share.
There you go.
And now I have to make sure I maximize it though. Is that?
Can you put it in present mode?
I know that's where I'm trying to do that right here.
Bottom left there.
There you go.
There we go. Let's see this does it. It was working fine earlier. All right, here we go. Well, thank you, Kim. Does everybody see this okay now?
Sort of.
Sort of?
Well, you're in present mode, but that's fine.
I'm sorry, everybody. I don't know what
I think it's fine, Fred.
Okay, I'll move through this then. Okay. So welcome, everybody. Andy and I were asked to give another presentation, kind of building off of what we did last year. So I wanted to give you a brief recap, or outline, I should say, of our presentation today. First of all, we're going to do a little recap of the NG911 activities that happened in 2020. Then do a little bit of discussion of some of the things that were learned through the gap analysis. Share some experiences in data review following the assessment. And then next steps that we will take with the gap analysis completed. And then answer some questions like we did in the last presentation. So in 2020, as Jessica and Jessica mentioned, DMA undertook a gap analysis to review the critical GIS data sets across the state. The WLIA NG911 task force was a big component of this effort, and I want to thank all of the individuals that spent 5 months every Thursday and some Tuesdays in the mornings going over this and participating in the process. It was really thorough. We met almost every week. We provided a background on the addressing and street naming in the state of Wisconsin, advised consultants on the WLIA standards. And with that, we were able to get some feedback and how that compares with the NENA standards and revise the standards a little bit based on that feedback. And the WLIA board then adopted those revisions for the address points and street center lines. And then also spent a fair amount of time building the best practices document, which is available on the DMA's web page. If you just type in Wisconsin DMA NG911, it will pretty much take you right to it. So getting into the gap analysis, it was a very thorough review of all of our data. There was an assessment that was made for every county in the state. provided each county with a detailed report on what was found, and then also talked about revisions on the WLIA standards and moving forward. So what did we learn? I think it's important that we talk about that the world wasn't in a total mess. We are in a pretty good position. As Jessica Fry mentioned, Wisconsin is ahead of the game. 97% of the counties participated in the QA/QC process. For those that didn't, they had undergone a similar assessment very recently, and so didn't participate in the project. Overall, statewide NG 911 accuracy was at 85%. The statewide NG 911 GIS data accuracy is at 93%, and that's just by adding or populating the mandatory fields, and Jessica Fry spoke to that a little bit. So just a little work in publishing some of these as part of a published process of some of these mandatory fields, we could get very good, much better statistics. And then a lot of the outside of acceptable values, if you will, or errors are really just around basically the values that center around what county, state, or country does your street center line or address point fall within. So that right there is something that can very easily be corrected as part of a published process. That said, there is work that needs to be done. And there were a few reoccurring issues that came up throughout the gap analysis, and I think it would be important that we start to walk through some of those. So one of the things that, as part of the assessment, is that we need to get to know our data better, right? It's not just our GIS data, perhaps, that we work with every day and know pretty well, but we also need to understand the MSAG and the ALI tables that 911 works with. And likewise, I think our 911 centers would benefit by understanding more about the GIS data. There are also legacy fields that are a critical component of existing CAD systems, and they can't just be dismissed. I mean, they're used for one-to-one matches between all of these related tables connected with ALI and MSAG. So understanding these components, I think, is very critical. The other thing too, and we talked about that in the last group about the differences between ALI and MSAG and errors. A lot of those errors may just be in the fact that ALI and MSAG does not contain US Postal Standard abbreviations. They use 2-digit abbreviations. So modifying or adjusting that relationship and when you join the tables to identify errors may do a lot to lessen your error count as you move through the review process. Parity. This was something that we spent a lot of time discussing, and it's a really critical component when moving to Next Gen 911. And it's basically understanding the left and the right side of a street center line, if you will. And it's related, the key relationship is to the MSAG table, so that it knows that your even addresses are on the left side and your odd addresses are on the right side, or vice versa. So we need to be able to verify that that is correct, and also to provide a cue to the fact that there might be some addresses that don't fit in that on the even, or you might have an odd address on the even side of the road, and that is not, it's an error, but it exists in the field. It's not an error in your database. It's just that the community made that mistake and refuses to address it or to change that address, if you will. So that's a critical component of this. And error types tend to be due to mixed parity, most likely resolved by just tagging the O, the E, the B, or the Z. And it is also, needs to be identified that this is reviewed, and if there are inconsistencies, that they be corrected. We need to ensure that the roads in the site structure address points fall within the provisioning boundary, right? So that they fall within the 911 county, your county file, or your given municipality. So a lot of the errors just happened along those border lines. And there were also situations where counties had to basically map into their neighbors because they needed that as reference data. Also, we have situations where counties are the primary dispatch for particular structures, but that can't be accessed from that one county, and they have to actually only can get access through another county. So they had to make exceptions for that. So ultimately, the goal here with NextGen 911 is that we don't have to deal with all of these kind of anomalies outside of our jurisdiction, but by combining our data together, we can then build a broader picture and only work on or maintain the data that's directly connected or within our jurisdiction. And this is also a lot of discussion was around exception codes. So as we move forward, we're going to have to work on this a little bit more on identifying those quote unquote errors that exist in our known world and tag them in a way so that when the state does an error checking, that they understand that these are known problems and an exception code is applied to it so that we don't get in a report the same error again and again and again that we've already corrected or that we know is a problem. Consistent address ranges in the street center lines file. That was probably a really big point. We do it in, I looked at some of the data from some of my neighbors and other parts of the state and found that we all do it a little bit differently. And a lot of that was being driven by the requirements of our CAD system, either previously or the one that we currently have, and developing that data to meet that specific requirement. But that doesn't necessarily mean that it works for somebody else. We need to eliminate all address range overlaps. That I think is pretty standard, pretty straightforward. Road ranges, the from to and the high low, and we need to evaluate if it's a mistake or if it's actually needed. And this is a really good example of, for instance, when you have two communities, you have a road running right along the boundary, and that community may have, the community to the south may have an address range that increases from east to west, and the community to the north has an address range that increases from west to north. At some point, you're going to have to alter your high-low ranges to make accommodations for that. And again, we need to tag that as, yes, this is not an error, this is the way it's supposed to be. Zero addressing, address ranges that have a zero as part of the pairing. So in either your high or your low, somewhere along there, you have 100 value, for instance, and then it goes to 0. That can create a lot of problems for a CAD system. That said, there are some very odd situations where there are values below 1 that have to be kind of dealt with. And I think, if somebody has that situation, I think we should have a discussion about that and how we can deal with that. And it's also important to note that some CAD systems don't allow 0 ranges, and some of them do. So we have to have a better understanding of how that works in our data and how we share that with our neighbors. Going forward, this one is pretty straightforward. I think we all understand that. when it comes to geometry, right? It's complex geometry. Some of the lines that are made up of hundreds of little vertices, that can create problems. So we need to try to build our data with more true curves, those types of things. There is some, discussion, and I think, Jessica Jimenez spoke of that. There are certain things that could be resolved on the state side, perhaps with this. Ideally, we should be resolving this on the local side. So we have to kind of figure out what are our roles in this process. Multi-part geometry. This was surprised me a little bit, but it does exist out there, and I think it's truly by accident. We accidentally merged a number of segments together, and they're not they're disconnected, but it can create some real problems. So we have to resolve those. And finally, the gaps, the overshoots, and the unnecessary dangles. Those are common things that just we have to do a better job of topology review of our data. Site and structure address point duplicates. Now, I speak from a county that does have, is part of our design, some duplicate addresses, because we have a CAD system that requires all address points to be within 500 feet of the road center line. And so we worked around that by having long driveways have a driveway entrance address point and a structure address point. But we need to then figure out how we're going to publish that into a statewide system. So creating the 2-point features, structure and driveway entrance, need to have one. Typically in the next gen 911 environment, we will want to have all of our points on a structure. We do know some counties that basically place their address points where the fire sign is placed at the driveway entrance. So some of these things we're going to have to be resolved, and again, these exception codes come into play with this. Mandatory fields, if nothing else, I think the main thing to look at from the report and in the WLIA standard and the final Wisconsin NENA standard, if you're going to do any work, focus on the mandatory fields. If your existing production environment doesn't accommodate to publish to a mandatory field, look at how you can build that in and start building that into your production environment. Because those are going to be the critical components for the statewide NG911 database. And then the big one, and I think Andy's going to talk to this, I think we're both strong advocates for this, it's the consistency in street names. Wherever possible, we need to try to avoid the entering of a street name as free text, but rather we need to leverage a centralized database, and that's where a master street name database really comes into play. It is the one definitive source. We shouldn't be having to do all this typing of the name and entering potential typos. We can join tables and basically work smarter, not harder. So if anything to take away from this presentation, I'm going to advocate one more time. I did this last year and I'll do it again. Start looking at creating a master street name table. And Andy and I and others, we'd be happy to discuss and walk through this with you and see how you can do it. So Andy, I'll hand it over to you.
Yeah, so I think you're gonna have to move the slides. We're flying through this, so we got some time. Then I got some animation, so you can hit all those, Fred. There's 3 bullets there. That's good. Since we got some time, I thought maybe we talk about my celebrity status at WLIA now. I really want to thank Fred for all his time and leadership on pulling all this stuff together. He spent a lot of time on the task force, work we did with DMA. I mean, always have to have someone to do this. And like he mentioned, one of the recommendations is to have a master street name database. I maintain the GIS data, address data for the 911 system for Forest County, pretty rural county. Like typical county, there's a lot of weird addressing stuff going on, a lot of different people issuing addresses. So I wanted to try to get that cleaned up. And I was the one that created the data from get-go. I've been maintaining that data. Like Fred said, I've been typing it in there. I thought I was doing a good job, thought things were good. But so, I wanted to kind of start with this. And I did real rudimentary GIS stuff to kind of do some joins and do some things. I'm going to talk about that and try to look at some of the stuff that I found, and I was trying to sync it, not only what was in the GIS, but what was in the tax database, 911 system, and even on the gas tax data, and the gas tax maps in some places, but also what's happening out on the streets. And it's not, as any of you have tried to do this, it's not real easy to get that syncing. Go to the next slide, Fred. Yeah, you can push. Looks like a couple bullets. That's it. So yeah, go back one. So what I did is I just made a simple field in there, a key field, and I put the MCD name and the full road name, and dissolved out my center lines on that to do just kind of more of a visual check on what I saw out there. And you can go to the next slide, Fred. And so you kind of saw things like this. Range line had a space in it. It didn't have a space. Sometimes Richardson Lake Road, was spelled out completely. Sometimes it wasn't. This is where you get the problematic things in your center lines by free typing it in there. And again, this data for the source data originally came from the tax roll. The point, the address, the site address information was kind of geocoded and then moved around in the field. It didn't all get cleaned up correctly, obviously, and we kind of saw some things. So I kind of looked for this and tried to work with the treasurer at Forest County to kind of get things synced in the tax roll. And some stuff was easy stuff like this. Next slide, Fred. I also wanted to highlight to them all the duplicate road names. Now we know we're going to have duplicate road names, but I just wanted to keep track of those. We had a lot of town line, range line, cemetery road go down the list. And I also wanted to highlight the ones that fell within the same address ranges, because there were some of those like that. I'm thinking in the future there'll be less of an issue with this, because I think what'll happen in a next gen environment, you'll get that XY location and it'll be looking for things near where that XY location is happening. But I still think it's important to look at those duplicate road names. I know you're not going to get rid of them unless you're Marathon County and decide to reissue 25,000 addresses in your county and try to eliminate most of them. Next slide. And I saw things like this, like Bayshore Road and things, and those were possibly different roads, to believe it or not, but that's the way they were in the same township. There was a South Shore Drive, so but they say no, the South is in the name, and so you just saw different duplicate kind of overlapping names, similar names, and things we kind of tell people try to stop. I know they're not going to change all these things and what's there. But next slide, Fred. So then once I got done with that, I kind of thought I had things cleaned up consistently and I had my master street name database, but I was wrong. I didn't, because then I go to the next slide, Fred. Then I wanted to start, all those address points had to match to one of those street center lines because they belong to that. And so again, I kind of made that key field on the name and the MCD and started, doing a joins and reverse joins back and forth to see what was dropping out. And there was quite a few of them that dropped out. And again, some of it was back to the same kind of, typos and things that you would expect to happen, like that lake. And, they had a lot of them. Go to the next slide, Fred. Give some examples. They were somewhat consistent in the county, the spelling out on the state and US highways, they'd spell out highway all the way, and on the county highways, it was HWY. Again, that wasn't real consistent. And just trying to get them all to be the same. And I told them, they said the GIS is the gospel for this. I'm like, no, it's not. Whatever it is, I just wanted it to be in sync. And so if we needed to change it, they were all the same way. We could change them all, and it would be a good way to kind of check things.
If you're going to be wrong, at least you're wrong all the way.
All the way through. And it's a good way to kind of make sure things, you know, are consistent, like you said, consistently right, consistently wrong, you know, however you want to do that. So go to the next slide once. So then after I was done with that, I wanted to see how many, I wanted to join my address points that were in the GS to the address, site addresses within the tax database. And I had lots of them that dropped out. They had a lot more in the tax database than I had in the GIS for numerous different reasons. Some were issued, you know, at the vacant lots, and they said, we didn't think you needed to know about those. They've had different addressing folks over the years issuing addresses, and sometimes when you don't work specifically right at the county and you're in that building, and even if you are, you're probably not always getting all the information on the flow of how things happen. So I wanted to get all those in there, and I kind of created some tables by township, kind of saying, here's all the anomalies or the things I saw. Like, it's a parcel with no improvement value and no structure, but you got an address, and that's probably okay. And it's probably hard to see that, but that's what that table was showing. It kind of showed, you know, or it was spelled different, or it was wrong, you know, and like I said, then I go back and forth with the county to work on it. But I had thousands of these errors, and they probably have, I don't know, 9,000, you know, addresses within the county. And some of them were similar to, like, when we talked about like the MSEG errors, kind of looking at, you know, just simplistic things spelled wrong, or, you know, it was AB over here and AB, you know, in there. And so I wanted to try to get everything, you know, synced, and I want them to look at that master street name database and use that when they issue addresses, or typing it in or using it for other things, that, you know, we're all on the same page and we're consistent as we kind of move forward. Next slide, Fred. So again, you know, I thought it was, you know, all good in the world, and, you know, we're all ready for next gen 911. No, this is just like one of those tiny little steps in the process. You know, you guys are asking, what can I be doing right now? Look at little simple things like this. You know, look at how they, you know, how they relate, and, you know, look for those typos. And I had a lot of stuff, you know, hyphenated roads without the hyphens, extra spaces in between road names, extra spaces at the end of road names. And again, these are all little things, but they all add up to different errors. You know, this did not correct any of the odd even issues that Fred kind of mentioned, odds on the even side. Line direction, again, I will knock on wood here, I think I got all the line directions correctly because I was the one that put them in, but, you know, other people get their hands in there and segments get flipped, or somebody puts a new road in not paying attention and puts it in wrong. Plenty of duplicate address points, even in a small county like this, but you're not going to get away from duplicate address points. I mean, there's multiple, you know, like we talked about, cemetery roads, range line. I kind of looked at topology errors, you know, the dangles, the you know, the little gaps and things that you shouldn't have there, which I feel I have none, but they always kind of draw up there. I think people are in there editing data, select things and pull things over when they don't know they have things. I mean, you see some weird things that come up. Next slide, Fred. Yeah, we'll go on that one. So, you know, and that would probably be the next step I would try to do, is like, you know, even if you don't, you know, plan on using the WLIA standard, you know, the goal is that one's been worked out a lot to kind of move things to NENA standard. Just look at what happens and where you have issues publishing to that standard. The more your data is parsed, the more you have things correct. They had a lot of training and talking about parsing data and how road names and different things that need to be in there, and start looking at some of the fields that you're missing. And some are really easy to accomplish, like Fred says, like county name and some of the other things like that. In each of those tables I have for my address areas by township, I'm keeping those, and I'm going to join those back to my address points, because those are like kind of those exceptions or those anomalies at this point until the county makes a decision on how or if they're going to correct those at all. I think we still got lots of time left, Fred, but go ahead. You can go to the next slide. I think when you were going to kind of wrap it up on.
Well, yeah. So again, you know, the mandatory fields is a big thing that you can start to look at and start to work on. As Andy pointed out, the consistency in the management of the data, consistency in the names, consistency in how the line flow, those types of things. That's another big piece to work on. And I would strongly encourage, I mean, we don't have the publication of what the Wisconsin NENA standard is. I mean, there's some talk about it in the document where they want to go with it. It's not been completely finalized, I guess. That it's pretty close. But if you want to really do something and say, okay, how close can I get my data? Try publishing your data to the Wisconsin standards. We have a street center line and an address point that WLIA developed. And we worked very closely with GeoCom and DMA on how to sync those two up so that it can support a statewide data product. Because ultimately, we're talking right now about next gen 911. But the bigger goal here is that we have a consistent data set that can meet a whole set of different needs, right? We as data managers can't be dealing with niche products and trying to have the same geometry and different attributes and all that. We need to have consistency. And so if we can publish to the WLIA standards, that starts to open up some doors. And think about the aggregation. As Jessica J mentioned, we're still a few years out from having an NG 911 county come online. But all of us have needs to share data with our neighbors. I mean, even in our 911 systems, right as we speak, right today, there are needs for us to have our neighbors' data because we do mutual aid, we do calls, routing. I have 8 counties that surround Dane County that I need to try to stitch in, and it's work. But if all of us could just publish to the WLIA standard, it would make it real easy for that data sharing. Then I don't have to worry about attributes and correcting things that don't work in our system. All I have to do is stitch it together and provide it, and I could do more timely updates for my 911 center also. And then we can once we're working with our neighbors and we can resolve some of these issues about, where the roads meet and things like that, then we're setting ourselves up for that larger statewide effort, the bigger goal. So I think that, I guess, is the one message, is start to think about how can you make it easier to share data between yourself and your neighbors, and leverage those WLIA standards that have been created and been vetted for, this has been what, 3 years have we been kind of at this. So and I guess as a final slide here, we have a special interest group meeting at 4:30 right after this. I think it's the same connection, right, Kim? It just flows right in. We're making this really convenient for you.
That's correct.
So I would encourage you to, if you have questions, to attend that. And this is really not intended as the Andy and Fred show to just talk. We need to open a discussion. So be ready for some questions or thoughts and share some ideas. And I think Andy and I are also talking about, if there's support for this, to start looking at maybe holding this NG 911 SIG once a month, over lunch or at 1 o'clock on a Wednesday or something like that. And just have an hour to have people call in and say, I came across this, or what's this, or the state announced something. What does that mean? Can we talk about it? Or this is my concerns. So try to attend. And now let's open it to questions if we have time.
We have lots of time for questions, so let's hear them.
Again, we can talk about my celebrity status.
That's right.
Need to start charging more now for this presentation.
It's the first time I heard that one.
Kim's just buttering us up, that's all.
Yeah. He thinks we're going to clean up our addressing data for.
I'll go. It's a little bit. Anyway, whatever. Okay. So I do Eau Claire County's addressing. The vast majority of our county is rural. However, we are quickly urbanizing in certain areas, especially the city of Altoona. Prior to it, we have what we call address points, what other people would call address access points. We have driveways, and then we have structure points, which some people would call address points itself, but it's on the structure. I think that's pretty common. Now we're getting to the point where prior we would the level of apartment buildings or major complexes in our county was pretty low, but it's shot up dramatically. How are you working with apartments and structures with, multiple units, commercial on the bottom, residential above, that type of thing? What's the best way to do that?
Give that one to you, Fred. You've dealt with that plenty.
Okay. So one of the things is it's really important to start working with those communities and understand what is their policy for addressing.
Let Peter do it.
Okay, well, that makes it easier.
Are you assigning the address?
Yes.
You're assigning the address. Okay.
I'm the addressing authority for everywhere outside of the city of Eau Claire.
Okay. So one of the things that this is discussed a little bit in the best practices document that I would point you to that as a useful aid. A lot of times what you will see is cities or municipalities will any structure that or any apartment that has direct access to the street, so a ground level unit that has its own individual access point, gets its own address. Any structure that has a communal entrance, so like an apartment building where you have the foyer and you come in and there's one area where the elevators are and then you go up to the first, second, third floor. That building then gets one address, and then all of the other apartments or whatever will be either get a unit, apartment, suite, whatever the unit, however they want to designate it. So then in that example, if it's 101 Johnson Drive, you will have 101 Johnson Drive apartment 002, or 102, 103, 104, whatever it is. So that's one of the ways that we deal with it is if it has its unique entrance, give it its unique address. And then there's condos, right? Condos are a whole different animal. The way that we deal with condos in Dane County is we give it its own unique address point because it has its own unique parcel number. So there's that relationship to it. So that might be right or wrong, but that one is probably, the condos are probably the easiest one to deal with because there's a recorded document that lays out the floor plan and all of those things. When you start getting to apartment buildings, that is all being done by the developer. So
well, they're coming to me asking me for what the unit number should be because they messed it up before. The fire department was unhappy and everybody turned around and said, well, what would you do? And then I got a new job.
Again, I would talk with the fire department on that. And one of the recommendations I made didn't go anywhere at the 911 subcommittee was that we should have a best practice guide for issuing addresses to follow and that we could modify and to be a living document as things went forward. Because you're going to do whatever you think is the best at the time until you find out you really have a problem. And then you have all that stuff that's wrong. And then you got to go back and try to deal with it.
So actually, Peter, you're in a really unique situation because you have a lot of control. You're not only having to respond to it, you have control on what that unit number is going to be.
In most circumstances, yes.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, I mean, there's a ton of more questions coming in right now, right? But this is something we should be discussing. We should kind of come up with some standardized policies or best practices, I should say, not policies, but best practices moving forward. You know,
Does your CAD software then require a address point for each unit in that building?
our CAD does not require it, but they do want it.
So yeah, I just did a 57 unit building, 2 suites and 50 whatever apartments.
Yep.
I did the stacked multi-layered points or whatever for one for every unit, because that's what they said they want now.
Yep.
You all do that?
Yes.
See, we never used to do that, but we didn't have that many apartment buildings.
Right.
We so we got it's not new anymore. When we got a new CAD system, we did a lot of these things. You know, we went to a master street name table. We placed a point for every unit. The unit stuff wasn't so much that they needed to know where it was, because a lot of times we don't know. It's just kind of placed in a cartographically pleasing fashion, like spread out on the building. The dispatchers wanted to put notes on particular units, like, hey, this guy's got a lot of guns or whatever, like, so that they could have alerts on, you know, some of the specific locations. So
That's
they want to know if it's apartment 27 again, because that guy is just crazy. And
the other thing too that we're finding is that with our CAD, the top priority was at least get the address, get the house number on it for an apartment building. So 101, get that point put in place. And then we'll work about the units in the apartments. What we're finding now is that some of our cities in Dane County are now wanting to have all of the units mapped, and also they're feeding it to our tax parcel system too. So we may have one parcel number with 60 addresses for every suite, right?
That's what we have that. Yep.
Yeah. And so so that's what we're using then as a resource to determine what they are, and then working with that respective city to say, what's the layout? You know, you've gone in there, and if we can't find anything else, if we can't find any, you know, location or something like that of how the floor plan is laid out, then we do exactly what you do, is we just stack them towards kind of the building entrance. We create one address point for the unit or for the building, and then a stack set for all of the suites. And at least they're there. And so if somebody even needs to do voter registration, looking for addresses in the city of Fitchburg, they can do, you know, canvassing and get all of the addresses in that area based on that address point layer.
You know, and one thing I hope to see is, you know, we talked about this before in some of the WLIA technical meetings, is there's never been a standard for the next, or for 911 data. There's never has been. You're just following whatever your CAD and your mapping vendor is telling you to do.
Right.
And they're usually not even the same. It's two different systems within the CAD and what's there.
Mm-hmm.
I'm hoping at some point when there's a standard and everybody's moving next to 911, you tell your CAD vendor, here's my 911 data and need a standard, eat it. You know, if you need to manipulate it to make it work within that system, go ahead and do it. And I know it's not going to be as simplistic as that, but that's something I think that, you know, it's crazy what's happened here. There's a couple questions in here. You know, how do I compare my MSEG data to the road center lines? There's a couple different ways to do that. You know, again, you're almost back to creating that master name address guide or database, and look at, you know, do you have all the streets in your MSEG, and are they all spelled the same as your GIS? That's your first simplistic one to do. And then after
watch
that,
out for the types, right? The avenue, the AV compared to AVE, or
right. And again, you're not going to, but you would make that assumption that you're going to change yours on one side to AVE or E and make them kind of the same, and just see if you're dropping any out there. But then you also want to be comparing your ranges that are within the MSEG. And there's a couple ways you can do that on the database side, kind of picking your high and low, but you're going to have some gaps and some things. But what I've always found on the MSEG side, they always cheat it. They always lie, or, you know, force out the range to be really much bigger than it normally is, just to cover their bases. So they're not always going to match exactly. I've created MSEGs fresh from some of the rural counties, again, that had no enhanced 911 at the time and needed an MSEG. And, you know, I would say at that point, that one matched pretty good. But again, in that same county, I won't mention his name, I don't think anyone's updated any of the MSEG records ever.
Right.
You know, since that, you know, I think it was just static and it just sat there.
And we've had a situation where one of my colleagues, his neighborhood, newly developed subdivision, and we've been, you know, scrutinizing the MSAG data, and there's no addresses in there at all. And it turns out that nobody in that subdivision has a landline. They were all cell phones. And then when one finally came in, then all of a sudden it popped up in the system. But then, like Andy said, they cheated it. They made it, you know, like a 500, you know, 100 to 500 or something, just so they can.
And you saw that in the northern counties too. You know, the recreational properties, they just didn't have landlines. Some did, but you know, if they didn't have a landline on the street, and there could be 20 structures on the street, and none of them had a landline, it never hit the MSEG, depending how it got in there. So you'd say, I got streets that are, you're going to have streets in your GIS that aren't in the MSEG. I guarantee you that. And you're going to have some that are spelled different. And then you got to work that through on how you get those in sync for sure.
Right. Is there another question, Andy?
Yeah, you want to take
Yes.
that?
I can't see the question, so you want to read it to me?
Let's state and US highway medians. This is a big red flag for us for duplicate ranges. Best practice 0-0 range on east, west, southbound, you know, kind of your divided highways with no addressing on, Fred, that one on off ramps.
Yeah, so if it's a limited access highway, our general consideration is that it doesn't have an address range to it. And then you're talking about the medians. So generally what we do is that anything that's towards the median, it gets a 0-0 address. So it's only you can only exit out what's facing a parcel, I guess, not what's facing the center of the right of way. So anything that's facing the center of the right of way gets a 0-0 address, and then the one that's facing else gets the potential address range. There is some recommendations on the naming of off ramps and on ramps. That does require a little bit unique management. At least for us in Dane County, we manage our ramps as a separate feature, and then as part of the publish process, we stitch it in so it looks seamless.
But that's because you're a CAD vendor, Fred, right?
Because we're a CAD vendor?
No, because you're a CAD vendor one in that format, right? Or you're
no. We basically, our 911 demanded that there would be an answer, and so I had to come up with a solution. So I did a lot of research, and part of that gets fed in with what Geocom did, but there's not a lot of good information. But the state of Kansas, there's a few cities that have kind of, for better or worse, developed kind of a standard that has to deal with exit ramps, and then your from and your to, on or off, those types of things, and that becomes a concatenated name. But there is no national standard for dealing with on ramps and off ramps.
But we got a little bit of time, not much left here before we got to go to the next presentation. But I want to remind what Fred said. Me and Fred plan on, now that we got celebrity status, having like a monthly call in, and we'll put it all on the WLIA website. If no one shows up, no one shows up. Me and Fred will talk silly for a while. But if people just got questions like this or things they run into, we don't have all the answers, but sometimes it's good just to talk through them and see what other people are doing. So we're going to kind of have, we're just going to have like, I don't know, we'll have to come up with a clever name for it, but talk with the addressing celebrities or something like that.
Yeah.
Address chat with Fred and Andy.
There you go.
Something like that.
Can we talk?
Yeah.
Can we talk?
Yeah. And that might be, for when you get in some of these larger rooms like this, some people don't want to ask questions. I mean, it'll be nice and small. I'm guessing there won't be a lot of people in there, but we plan on doing it for a while and just see how it goes, right, Fred?
Yeah, and the only way, there's no stupid question. If there's something that you want clarification on, you guys are the ones who have, we've been working on this for a while, but every time we have a work group, there's new stuff that I think Andy and I are like, wow, I never thought of that one. How do you can't write a book on this. This stuff exists out there, and we just have to, we have to learn together and come up with solutions and then and help, provide some guidance to DMA, because, they've got a big task in front of them, right? I mean, we're worried about our little 72-second piece of the state of Wisconsin, but they're trying to come up with a statewide solution. And I think, we have to be partners in this and get it resolved together.
Fred and Andy.
There's some agreement in the chat that a best practice guide for assigning addresses would be great. And I agree with that too. And I have zero authority in Waukesha County. And so I have 37 municipalities all addressing things a little differently, and coordinate addresses thrown in there, and clerks are on a revolving door basis, it seems, lately. So best practices and training is on my docket this year.
So just as a little highlight, I guess, I was in the same boat, and I had a number of community cities and a few villages that are struggling with how to assign an address or street name, and clerks who, I'd never done this before. So I did put together a list. I have it up on our webpage. I'll show everybody at the SIG meeting after this.
That'd be great.
But it's just kind of a laundry list of recommendations. Like you said, I can't say thou shall or thou shall not, but I say it's a bad idea, or avoid, or don't. And I've been, sharing it with some of my communities, and they're like, oh, thank you. This is just, something that at least I have some backup when I say, no, we can't do it this way.
Adam Dorn, do you have a question before?
Yeah, I never really dealt with ESNs before. So I was looking at the ESN. I've never seen an ALI file or an MSEG file straight up until I saw the results from Geocom. So I was comparing them, and we don't have that many ESNs in our county, but I'm trying to gauge where the heck they are without looking at every single record. Can you guys explain how you've dealt with ESNs and how you're starting to code those on your center lines?
I don't think Fred has them coded to yours, right, Fred?
I do not, and if I have any influence at all, I mean, I have been working with our 911 center, and they don't even know what they need.
Yeah, that's kind of what I got.
Adam, in Forest County, most of them followed MCD boundaries, with the exception of a few areas. So I mean, it was somewhat easy to code an ESN in there. And I needed the ESN in that county because they did not have an MSEG before they moved to Enhanced 911. So I was making that MSEG from the center line. So that's how it got in there. But I can see why some people don't have them in there. And that ESN zone is a moving target, as they renegotiate now that you're going to take care of this little part, that ESN changes.
And keep in mind, I mean, and I definitely would like to know, like Jessica's Fry experience and some of this stuff too, working through this. But when you look at the NENA standards, the ESN boundaries for your left and right, that's something that's not even, there's an asterisk there that says this will not be part of a fully deployed next gen 911 implementation. It's one of these kind of legacy elements, and it is a conditional field. Whether you have it, you use it. My biggest challenge would be to have to impose all of these breaks in my center lines with the left and the right ESNs that would just explode my ability to manage that data set. It just would make it impossible.
Yeah.
So, trying to put something in and then do all that work to find out that, oh, well, now we've gotten to 98%, and so we will deprecate this requirement. It's like,
We dumped all of ours. Yeah, we dumped all of ours off of our center lines when we switched dispatch systems because they didn't need them anymore. We have a map-based system where we actually have they call them ESZs. They're a little bit smaller.
Okay.
So when I first heard that we might have to put them back on, I was like, oh, geez.
Yeah. I mean, it is and with all the other things that we have to do, and then add that onto the list that eventually will go away. I mean, I guess my hope is that we are more efficient in Wisconsin and can actually get to a geo ALI and a geo MSAG in a short order as we move towards next gen 911. We've got the data, it's a table. And the ALI and MSAC data is really not even being managed as in some areas, or it's woefully out of date. At least let's agree that this was a good data set when it was needed, but it's not relevant anymore.
Mhm. I'm going to give Jessica Fry the last word in the comments. ESN numbers are typically not needed for transition, only the MSAG community. So there you have it.
There you have it.
And we are out of time.
Thank you.
We are going to thank you, Fred and Andy, for visiting us today and sharing all of your great insight. And thank you for all of your hard work these past couple of years as well. It's very much appreciated.